So the most that it could have done would have been to try and build it up so that it could be reasonably stable and people could live somewhat better than before. The term socialist accumulation it may exist somewhere. I haven't actually seen it. What was actually used, I'd actually have to see that in Russian to actually be sure of it. But it was used, for instance, by Preobrazhensky as primitive socialist accumulation. Trotsky didn't particularly like that in that way. His book is extremely good, but he didn't particularly like it. Well, of course, one could use it in another sense, I suppose, but in the sense that Adam means it, I agree that you don't have socialist accumulation. It may be that Trotsky uses it for some reason, I don't know. But in general, if Adam had put the point there, I'm sure he would have agreed. That's what comes out from what one reads him in general. If you look at the comrade over there referred to what he'd said on Britain, France, and so forth. Yes, obviously he was wrong. We know he's wrong. So, Marx was wrong too. You remember, Marx, after the failure of 1848, is expecting the working class to rise, to be a crisis, and he's expecting it in 1857. Before 1857, it comes about in 1857, not much happens. Marx is wrong. If you look at it in a very narrow sense, of course, most great leaders are wrong in something or other and have made predictions which were absurd. So that you don't judge them by that, particularly not in his own context. One would have to judge Trotsky in Russia at the time, where he was playing a particular role, most particularly. No question he was wrong. He was also wrong on the Fourth International. No question. Obviously, the Fourth International didn't play any role at all. Of course, it's true. But that doesn't exhaust the issue. If Trotsky had been right in everything, he would have been inhuman. The question, that isn't the question. The question is, in the areas where he was operating, in the thought that he was writing, what role did he actually play? And of course, in this respect, it is in relation to socialism as a whole. And I think drive of what Adam is going towards is just not true. It's not true that Lenin or Trotsky thought they were building socialism in Russia, or that whatever was there was actually socialist. In some cases, it's true. Either the words are used with quotation marks, or they're used in a way where they're trying to get general support, and where quite obviously they don't actually think it is in itself socialist. One has to look at the context and not say that they actually think they are building socialism when they obviously didn't. Everything they've written, even their wrote, made it clear that they didn't think of it was socialism. So I think that's fair. In regard to the question of peasantry, the peasants in Russia were emancipated in 1861 by Tsar Alexander II. It's true that they then had to pay the lord out, and consequently their conditions actually in many cases worsened. That's absolutely true. However, it's very hard to call it feudal. Trotsky calls it semi-Asiatic, using Marx's conception of the Asiatic mode of production. I think that's basically correct. It was a very complex formation, because you have, by the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, an absolutist regime. It's not feudal in the sense in which Britain was feudal. Stalin called it feudalism because it assisted his own conception. It was a highly complex regime, and because of that, and because the factories in Petrograd, Urals, Moscow, were actually very advanced, sometimes more advanced than Britain, which of course again Trotsky makes as a point as to why it actually occurred. You therefore had, in a sense, a more advanced working class, while at the same time it had, in a certain sense, was more backward. So one can't say it took place in that way simply because it was backward. It wasn't. It was both backward and very advanced, which of course again is one of Trotsky's major points of the combined and uneven development. And that's absolutely true. That is why it occurred there. It was as they said, a weak point in world capitalism. That's why it occurred. The question is, were they stupid to take power under those conditions? Do you wait until Parliament is ready for you to have a majority in it and just stand by it in that way? You can't do that. And even in Britain, I very much doubt whether it'll happen quite so simply. How do you achieve socialism? The question was asked. Well, that links directly to that. The question is why we don't have socialism today. Marx wrote, after all, from 1840s onwards. That's now 160 years ago. Why do we not have socialism today then? I'd say that there's two bases to this, the subjective and the objective. You are not going to get socialism when the objective conditions are not there, however much you may like it. Secondly, people must have a consciousness that socialism is possible, that's real, and that is not utopian. Today, I don't believe people don't actually want it if I actually explain to them. They don't believe it is possible, or they believe it will turn into Stalinism. Remember, that's one of the major points made by Martin Amis. He says, yes, it's a utopia, and any utopia is going to end up like Stalinism. We must be able to, in other words, we must be able to show people that it will not end up as Stalinism. So you have to be able to show not just that our aim, socialism, is what we want, because I don't think that's difficult. But you have to show the way there, and that it will not end up in the way that Stalinism has ended up. And why hasn't it taken place up to now? In part because of Stalinism, because of the control of the Communist parties. And one can't just say they didn't exist. They played an absolutely crucial role in preventing the coming about of socialism. And to this day, even if they've largely gone away, the failure of what happened in the Soviet Union, Stalinism itself, remains as an incubus, which we must be able to show is not socialist, and had a particular reason. If you simply don't analyze it, just say, oh, that was capitalist, no one is going to believe you. There has to be a basis to the thing itself. One has to understand it. So that's the first aspect of it. The second aspect of it is how do we get to socialism? I don't believe a simple process of voting at the ballot box is actually going to work in itself. I think you have to have major campaigns, you have to have major parties, you have to develop these major parties, and that assumes that the working class is beginning to swing towards you. And for that you do need one or many parties. Persuading them, you do need leaders and for this purpose. Final point. One of the reasons why Trotsky's making these predictions is like any good Marxist, he's an optimist. But if you're a pessimist, you will just give up, just given what has happened in the last century. He was an optimist, and he was hoping, really against hope, that things would actually develop. They didn't develop. I don't think one can condemn any socialist for making a prediction that socialism will come back soon. Well, I don't think one can condemn them and just say they were wrong. They were wrong, yes. The question is why, how, and what they're actually doing. So what we have to do, well, what I think we're in a